Israel's a very small nation. If I drive from the south here in a lot to the Golan Heights, it's the same as driving here to Gulf Shores. Now, what I'm going to tell you today, starting in class today and tonight as well, that 95 to 98% of everything I'm going to tell you is true. How many preachers have ever come up and stood before you and say, 95% of what I'm telling you is true? The thing is, I don't know what's true and I don't know what's false, because what I deal with is history. What I deal with is archaeology. We dig things out of the ground and we look at them and we say, oh, we think that's a coin from the time of David or whatever, or one of the Hasmomeans. We got that stuff pretty well nailed down. We dig something out, we find it's a piece of pottery. Well, we don't know all the answers up front when we start looking at things until we further analyze them, or as technology gets better. Here's an example. When I was writing the book, there was one example of a man's bone found that had been crucified, just one. When this was found, the man, they determined, was crucified between 180 BC and 70 AD. So it's a pretty long range of, 250 years is a pretty long period of time. But it's the only bone fragment up to the time I was writing my book that they found of a crucified man. And the reason they found it was because this nail bent. When they were nailing this guy's foot to the cross, the nail bent into a knot in the cross, in the olive wood cross, and they couldn't get it out. Nails were very expensive, and the Romans used, once a person had died, they just pulled the nail out and they used them on the next guy. Next up, nail them up. They couldn't do this one. That's why this nail still exists. Now, the way they did that, they would put a piece of acacia wood, in this case, on the outside of the foot, and then nail it through the foot into the cross, in this case, an olive wood cross, which olive wood is pretty ubiquitous around Jerusalem. When they first discovered this bone fragment, someone wrote an article on it, and I glommed onto the article and I started writing. I said, this is cool. I'm going to write. Oh, this is so cool. They found this fragment. And what they first thought was that this man was crucified like this, because they thought that the fragment was a bone from the right heel, the left heel, and the right ankle, I think. I may have those bones a little bit different. So the only way that could have happened is if the man was crucified like this. And the Romans were very creative in the way they crucified people, right? It's like a game to them, probably. It's a job. You're going to get creative when you do it. So I had this picture in my book. Actually, my mom drew this picture. So I put that picture in my book, and then a little bit later on, I read an article that said, oh, wait, that's not the way it happened at all. This is only a fragment from the right foot. So it turns out the guy was crucified like this. So I had to go back and when I was scrubbing out everything, okay, he really didn't crucify, but he crucified like this. 95% of everything I'm going to tell you is true. 5% may not be. I might be telling you 100% truth. I don't know. If you don't know, nobody knows. So just deal with it. The land of Israel. Now, my talk today is on the city of Jerusalem. When I first started doing this, I came up with probably 2-3 dozen slides just on Israel. I said, I can't do this. I got too much material. But I did want to have at least one chart of Israel. Israel's a very small nation. If I drive from the south here in a lot to the Golan Heights, it's the same as driving here to Gulf Shores. Pretty small nation, 260 miles or something, I think. If I look at length from the West Bank here over to the Mediterranean Sea, 9 miles. I looked on a map, I kept trying to find something 9 miles from Plainview. Well, Winchester Road, I think, is 10 miles. I can drive from here to Winchester Road and I'll be out in the middle of the ocean. Israel's a small place. When you hear in the news from the river to the sea, have you all heard that in the news? Anybody heard that in the news? From the river to the sea. What they're talking about is let's drive the Jews out from the Jordan River to the sea. And let's make that a Palestinian territory or whatever. That's what they mean. They want a one-state solution, the Palestinians. The West Bank is blown up here. The areas in dark green, or whatever color that is, hard to tell, The areas in dark green are Palestinian control, full control. The Palestinians have full civil control, full security control. The areas in lighter green, hard to see, are areas where the Palestinians have full civil control and the Israelis have full security control. The areas in white are where the Israelis have both civil and security control. Okay, so that's what the West Bank looks like, similar to the Gaza Strip. So that's Israel today. And again, I really didn't have time to go into all that. I just narrowed all that down to just one chart. I love the saying, Jerusalem is old, Jerusalem is new, Jerusalem can hold Muslim, Christian, Jew. Now, why study Jerusalem? My training growing up was in electrical engineering. And I went on to become, I didn't really practice much electrical engineering in my career. I went on to become an aerospace engineer. But my passion has been the study of the Old Testament and the Intertestament times. When I was training to become an electrical engineer, I'd have to take math classes. And I hate math. Anybody hate math? I hated math. But sometimes you do what you got to do, right? If I'd known there was going to be so much math, I probably would not have become an electrical engineer. But learning math, the reason I hated it was because the guy would start on one end of the board and he'd start writing equations. He'd go around the room, if there are boards all the way around the room, he'd come back here and he'd erase this board and he'd start again. And they never explained to me what was up with that. So I went through calculus, differential equations, partial differential equations, complex variables, Laplace transforms, all that stuff was like, why? And then as I went along in my electrical engineering career, I said, oh, that's why we need calculus. In fact, calculus is on your phone. You pick out your phone. If you lose a GPS signal, calculus is fixing that for you because your phone can sense acceleration and angular acceleration. It can't sense velocity. But it can integrate acceleration and angular acceleration to give you velocity. And it can integrate velocity to give you position. And that's what calculus does for you. You integrate digitally. Partial differential equations, ooh, I hated that. But it turns out you can solve all kinds of problems with that. You can solve machines, the behavior of machines, the behavior of economics, the behavior of biology. Complex variables, they explain electrical engineering. There's complex part. There's a real part and an imaginary part, which didn't make sense to me at the time. Laplace transforms, that allows me to solve problems in the frequency domain instead of the time domain when they're really, really hard to solve. So as I went through my electrical engineering career, I discovered that, yeah, there's a reason behind this madness. There's a reason I did take math. The same thing with the Bible. Why study Jerusalem? Well, Jerusalem appears in the Bible a whole bunch of times. And I think as you study the Bible, as you're reading something, if you know more about that specific topic, I think it becomes useful for you to know about that topic, right? So this is how many times Jerusalem is mentioned in the Bible. I think I got them all. I'm not sure if I did or not. So we're going to study starting with the foundations of Jerusalem. We're going to talk about the three valleys, the Hinnom Valley in the south, the Tyropian or Central Valley down the middle of the city, really, or to the west side of the city of David, and the Kidron Valley between the Mount of Olives over here and the city of David here, okay? The Kidron Valley is referenced 13 times in the Old Testament, once in the New Testament. When Jesus left Jerusalem, he went down and crossed over the brook Kidron and up into the Mount of Olives, right? Very familiar thing that happened back in New Testament times. One thing that really struck me as I went to Jerusalem was the depth of the valleys. You can stand up there and say, wow, that must have been a hike for him to go from Jerusalem down in the Kidron Valley and then up into the Mount of Olives. And it was. In fact, the valleys then were probably 60 feet deeper then than they are now. That's kind of cool. The Hinnom Valley, 13 references to the Old Testament, that's where they sacrifice kids, sons and daughters, boys and girls, to the fire god of Molech. That's the Hinnom Valley. Seven mountains the city was founded on. We'll start over here on the east side, Mount Scopus, the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Corruption, named so from when Solomon built some altars to false gods. The Mount of Olives, very familiar to us in the New Testament. The Mount Scopus, there's a university up there, there's a lookout, and you can look over the city of Jerusalem. The purple dots here are photo spots that I took photos across the Kidron Valley. This is from Mount Scopus. It's really hard to see here in this environment. The Temple Mount wall, which is shared with the wall of Jerusalem, is here. The Kidron Valley is way down here. Look at that hike going from the Kidron Valley up to the city of Jerusalem. And then the hike going from the Kidron Valley up to, in this case, the Mount of Olives would be over here. Across the mount, from the Mount of Olives, I'm looking at the Temple Mount as well. Again, the depth of the valley, you can't even see the bottom of the valley here, the Kidron Valley here. In the foreground here, these are all Jewish tombs. These are all Christian tombs. These are all Arab or Muslim tombs. What could go wrong? Thank you all for watching my videos. I very much appreciate it. We had a little extra time at the end of this video. What I want to share with you are some displays that I have that I always bring to my events. If you're interested in me coming and talking to your group, I would be very glad to do that at some point. But stick around. I'm going to go through some of the displays that I have that I can bring. Coins, Bible pages, maps, temple models, things like that. Stick around. Hope you'll enjoy it. This is taken from the city of David over to Mount of Corruption, which now is the city of Silwan. Silwan is a Palestinian community. This was an interesting day in our lives. We hooked up with a Palestinian, a Muslim tour guide. We happened to meet him on Mount Scopus. I think it was Mount Scopus, or maybe it was Mount of Olives. Anyway, we met him and ended up at his house and had snacks with him and that kind of thing. And we were standing on his porch near the Gihon Spring, probably 50 yards from the Gihon Spring, and I shot this picture from his porch across the Kidron Valley, the southern Kidron Valley, over to the Mount of Corruption, which is the community of Silwan today. The main mountains, really the main mountain is Mount Moriah. That's where the temples were built. That's where the temple mounts were built. That's where the Dome of the Rock stands today. That's where the Herodian Temple Mount stands today. We're going to go into a lot of that detail tonight if you come back. So the Muslims believe that Ishmael was almost sacrificed here. We believe that Isaac was almost sacrificed here. Maybe, maybe not, maybe one of these 95% things, 5% things, because the Bible says that God told Abraham to take Isaac into the land of Moriah and offer him there upon one of the mountains, which I'll tell you thereof. Well, it's the reason that it was Mount Moriah, but we don't know for sure. I mean, that's really, really ancient history, but it probably was Mount Moriah. And that goes back a long, long way, people believing that it was Mount Moriah. King David bought the threshing floor of Araunah for 50 shekels of silver. He bought the whole mountain for 600 gold shekels a little bit later on. All the temples were built here. The Muslim Dome of the Rock currently sits here, and it's actually not the highest point in Jerusalem, which is kind of interesting, but it is the most important mountain. It's the most hotly contested piece of real estate in the world. And this is up on the Temple Mount. These are a couple of pictures I took of the Dome of the Rock. You can go up there and roam around freely. The Temple Mount is controlled by the Muslim Waqf. They are under Jordanian authority. They have civil control of the Temple Mount. So if they want to close the Temple Mount for a Ramadan or whatever they're doing, they close the Temple Mount. The Israelis have security control of the Temple Mount. You can go up there today, but you have to plan your trip entirely around that. It's very, very limited hours. They have, I think it was like 3 hours in the morning you go, starting at 7 a.m., I think it was. We were in line probably at 6 a.m. And once you get up there, once you get past the Muslims standing there wanting to take you around and show them all the Muslim things, we said, no, thank you. We're going to do our own thing. You can go roam around up there pretty much at will. But you need to be very careful. You need to dress very modestly. I wore long pants, even though it was 9,000 degrees that day. My wife wore a long skirt. Her shoulders were covered. If you wear shorts or something, then you'll have to wrap a shawl around you. If you don't want to wear a kilt, then wear long pants if you go to the Temple Mount. Don't carry a Bible. Don't hold your wife's hand or your girlfriend's hand. Don't kiss your wife. Don't pray. If you go to the Temple Mount, read up on the things you need to do to go to the Temple Mount. Once you get up there, roam around freely and check it out. It's pretty cool. This is the Dome of the Chain in the foreground with the Dome of the Rock in the background. The Dome of the Chain, 95% sure that that's where the front porch of the temple was. I can go stand in the Dome of the Chain today and be on the front porch of the temple. That's a place that Jesus never stood. That's a place that Paul never stood. That's the place where none of the apostles ever stood because they couldn't go in there. Only the priests could go in that part of the temple complex. That's kind of cool that I can stand there and imagine that that's where the front porch of the temple was. We tried to go in the Dome of the Rock. Little guy well, wasn't so little, but a guy sitting out in a folding chair out front. So we walked up and he said, no, no, no. The only English words he knew, I think, were no, no, no. He wasn't waving at us. He's saying, you cannot go in. You have to be Muslim to go in. So we didn't. There's some cool stuff in the Dome of the Rock, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. Or actually, I'll show you that tonight. So other mountains, we have the Hill of Antonia Fortress. We have the old Mount Zion, and we have new Mount Zion. Then we have the city of David. So now we're starting to build up the city of Jerusalem. The city of David was built on this land peninsula with this deep Kidron Valley over here on its east and the deep Tyropian Valley over here on its west. The city of David was formed there. The city of Jerusalem was formed there because of two things: water and defense. The city of David was very, very defensible on these three sides. Deep valley, and a not as deep valley, but still a deep valley. Very defensible. They have recently discovered, it's amazing, the line of work that I do, well, I'm retired, but the line of work I'm now doing, it's just changing all the time. They just recently discovered this trench, 230 feet long, 30 feet deep, and 100 feet wide, and that was probably to defend the city of David. They think it was trenched out during that time. That's kind of cool. So the city of David was very defensible, and they had the Gihon Spring that originally ran down into the Kidron Valley. Somebody fixed that later on, Hezekiah. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. So this is the city of David today. This is the Temple Mount wall. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque that sits on the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock is over here off the picture. The city of David is to the south of the Temple Mount, of the old city of Jerusalem. Some neat things in the city of David. There's the burnt chamber as opposed to the burnt house. We'll talk about the burnt house tonight when we talk about the Jerusalem destruction of AD 70. The burnt chamber was the Jerusalem destruction of AD 587 when Nebuchadnezzar burned the house of the Lord, the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem, every great house he burned down. You know what? It takes more faith to be an atheist than it does a Christian. Because I can go to Jerusalem and I can see things that are talked about in the Bible that are actually happened in Jerusalem. That's kind of cool. And they've proven this with multiple confirmations. Radiocarbon, Archaeometic, whatever, confirmation of the date of the pottery. So this is a burnt chamber that was destroyed back in the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 587. Recently discovered, only talked about in the spring 2024 issue of BAR, Biblical Archaeology Review. Another neat thing in the city of David is the Gihon Spring. It has 317,000 gallons of flow a day. Before Hezekiah's tunnel was built, as I mentioned, it flowed into the Kidron Valley. Its name means gushing. Next up, Solomon. Solomon came along and he built a temple and he extended the city to the north. We don't know if he built the square Temple Mount or not. Lean Rittenmeyer, who's really the definite expert on the temple and the Temple Mount. He wrote a book called The Quest, and he believes that the Temple Mount, the square Temple Mount, was built later on by Hezekiah. So somewhere between Solomon and Hezekiah, the square Temple Mount was built. That's why it's in a dotted line there. Next up, the Old Testament of Hezekiah. He reigned from 729 BC to 686 BC, and he was an amazing builder. He was kind of like Herod before Herod was cool. He built this wall, an extension of the walls of Jerusalem, and we can go today and see this, what's called the Broad Wall, excavated out right about there. And some of this is guessing when I drew this picture. But you can go see the Broad Wall today, and we know that that's probably about as far as the Bible, the city of Jerusalem was at the end of the Old Testament, because we know that in Nehemiah they said they extended the city, they rebuilt the city all the way to the Broad Wall, Hezekiah's Broad Wall. Another neat thing Hezekiah did, probably the neatest thing that Hezekiah did, was Hezekiah's tunnel. As I mentioned, the Gihon Spring, gushing 317,000 gallons of water a day, it just runs down the valley, runs out. Not so good, right? Well, Assyria, under Sennacherib, was threatening invasion. He had taken Israel already, and he was threatening Judah. And Hezekiah said, I'm not going to let that happen. Hezekiah commissioned 2 teams of diggers, one starting at the Gihon Spring, one starting at the Siloam Pool, and they started digging toward each other. How did they do this back in the days before GPS and I don't know, lasers? It's like you need a laser or something to see if your tunnel's straight or whatever. They started digging toward each other. This plaque is a depiction. This is actually a replica of the plaque. The Turkish, they actually carved this out when they controlled Jerusalem, and they took it it's in the Istanbul Museum. So this is just a replica inside Hezekiah's tunnel. But this plaque says that the diggers, they heard their fellow man digging. And they started digging toward each other, and faster and faster. We hear them, and all of a sudden they break through and water starts flowing. Wow! That's what the plaque says. That may be a little bit of a loose interpretation of what the plaque says, but it is. They said they started digging toward each other. Pretty cool. You can go in Hezekiah's tunnel today. We actually went in at night after it closed. This was part of our terrifying day with our Palestinian tour guide. He happened to know Adam, who held the key at the end of Hezekiah's tunnel, on the Siloam Pool end of the tunnel. He said, "You want to go in Hezekiah's tunnel?" And we hadn't really planned to do it that day or that night. That was later on in our schedule. And we said, "Sure." Why not? Let's go. So we met up with Adam. He opened up the tunnel for us, and there were 4 of us in the tunnel tonight, me and Shelley, Abed, who was our tour guide, his son, and his daughter. Now, if you've ever been in Hezekiah, anybody been to Jerusalem in here at all? So some of you have. Did you go to Hezekiah's tunnel by chance? Okay. Was it loud? When I've seen videos of it, it seems really loud because people splashing and screaming and playing at this end. It kind of seems like it echoes up and down the tunnel. Well, the only one screaming and acting like a little girl that night was me. So we walked up from the Siloam Pool all the way up to the Gihon Spring. Of course, the water varies from just over your ankles to probably up to, about here, I guess. And walked through the tunnel up the Gihon Spring. Of course, it was locked. Turned around and came back. That was pretty cool. And there we are sitting in the Siloam Pool end of the tunnel. And that's the Byzantine. There's 2 Siloam pools. I don't have time to get into it, but this is the Byzantine Siloam Pool. So we are sitting there after going through Hezekiah's tunnel. Manasseh's edition next is in this light blue here, known as the Ophel. It was probably actually built in Solomon, but likely enhanced by Manasseh. And this is likely, if you look at the outside shape of this is likely the shape of Jerusalem at the end of the Old Testament when Nehemiah rebuilt the walls. Next up, Jerusalem of the Inner Testament. This is the one that we don't study about very much because they were Hasmomeans and they did things in the Inner Testament we don't talk about. The Hasmomeans were great builders. There's a lot of politics that we found out about in this morning's talk, but there's a lot of great building that happened also. They built what was called the first wall. Now all these are Josephus' terms. I thought I had that up here. But as we go, as we study the destruction of Jerusalem tonight, these terms will become important. So the Hasmoneans built the first wall here in purple. They built then the second wall here in brown, and they extended the Temple Mount here in yellow. We'll talk about why they did that tonight if you come back. The Hasmoneans, as I said this morning, had a huge amount of influence on the New Testament, and most people don't even know who they were. That's why I'm here. That's my goal in life. That's my retirement plan. So you can go and see sections of the Hasmonean first wall, second wall. You can see Hasmonean Tower. This is in the City of David Museum, the courtyard. Shelley and I showed up there like 45 minutes or something before they closed, and we said, "Do we buy a ticket for this or not?" We got just a few minutes. We'll just have to run through it, and we did. We bought a ticket, and we just ran through the City of David Museum. When you go to Jerusalem, there's so much to do, it's really hard to see everything, no matter how long you stay. Next time we go back, when the war settled down, we're going to go back for, I hope, a month, maybe 6 weeks. We'll see. Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. We, of course, had the first wall built by the Hasmoneans, the second wall built by the Hasmoneans, but we see a new Temple Mount here in light blue. This Temple Mount was built by Herod, and it was vastly different from what the Temple Mount was in Intertestament times of the Hasmoneans. We will talk about that again tonight. I'm hoping to whet your appetite, so you'll come back tonight at 5 o'clock? 5 o'clock, yeah. Okay. We have the lower city, where probably the poorer people live. We had the upper city, where probably the priests and the richer people lived. And these are all terms used by Josephus when describing Jerusalem. In AD 70, there was a third wall built by well, partially built by Agrippa I, because he feared that if he built the whole wall, that Claudius, the Roman emperor, might think that he was planning a revolt. He was not. He was actually friends of the Romans. But he only built the foundations of the walls. That wall was probably finished right before the Jews, right before the Romans came and destroyed Jerusalem. Modern Jerusalem, in red here, shares many of the same walls. Now, when I say shares the walls, I mean, if I go down to the foundation all the way down to the bedrock, you'll see the original foundation of, like, Solomon's Temple Mount. You'll see the original foundation of the Hasmomean Temple Mount, the Herodian Temple Mount. You'll see the original foundations of the third wall. You'll see the second wall foundations. You'll see the third wall and the first wall foundation. That's kind of cool. And you can actually walk around the walls of Jerusalem if you so choose to do, and I'll show you that in just a minute as well. 4 quarters in modern-day Jerusalem: the Jewish quarter, the Christian quarter, Armenian quarter, Muslim quarter. The cool things in the Jewish quarter are the Wailing Wall. That's old terminology. It's called the Western Wall today. There's a men's area and a women's area. The women's area to the right, you go up to the Western Wall. Those are Herodian stones. You can go touch them and pray there or whatever you want to do. But there's lots of Jews there because that's where they go. That's as close as they can get to where the temple used to be, up on the Temple Mount. So they're down here on the below on the Temple Mount wall. So the Western Wall is there, and also the entrance to the Temple Mount for non-Muslims, the Maghrabi Gate, also known as the Morocco Gate. That's the only gate you can go in, unless you're Muslim. I don't know. There may be some Muslims here today. I don't know. But if you are a Muslim, you can go in any of the other gates you want to, but only Christians are allowed to go in the Maghrabi Gate. The Armenian quarter has the Tower of David Museum. The Christian quarter, Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Muslim quarter has the Via Dolorosa. What could go wrong? Now, interestingly enough, you can actually buy a ticket right inside the Jaffa Gate here at David's Tower and go walk on the walls of Jerusalem. That's pretty cool. There's a north walk and a south walk. The northern walk is much longer. It goes all the way over here past the Lion's Gate, almost to where the Temple Mount starts. The southern walk starts at the same place and is much shorter, but goes all the way over here to almost the Dung Gate. That's really neat. If you go to Jerusalem, I would suggest you do it. It's called the Ramparts Walk. What you can see on the Ramparts Walk are lots of stuff. Some of the paths were pretty narrow, as you can see here. Now, I'm afraid of heights. I don't do heights. I'm not afraid if I feel safe. I've been in, of course, airplanes and stuff all the time. I've been in a helicopter before without a door, but I was strapped in. I had a seatbelt on, and I felt like I'm afraid of falling. I say I'm afraid of heights, but I think I'm afraid of falling because I was strapped in. I felt safe, even with that open door of the helicopter. But I was not afraid of heights here at all. Even though these paths are pretty narrow, this wall chunk is pretty wide. I didn't feel like I would ever fall off anywhere. Some of the paths were very wide. This is Shelley walking along the razor wire fence here on one of the parts of the walk. Lots of razor wire up there, lots of cool pictures you can get. There's a Dome of the Rock and one of the mosques there in the foreground. But that's through one of the keyholes in the wall. You can also see a lot of activity going on below. I saw people with guns, lots of people with guns actually, and I was A-okay with that because they were on my side. Those were IDF soldiers, and they were there. If something went wrong, they were going to take care of the problem, right? And they do. I mean, they do almost every day, it seems like. So I looked down and saw lots of IDF soldiers walking around with their guns. In fact, in Tel Aviv, they would put them up on the table in the mall when we went there and hang them on the back of their chair when they were eating lunch and stuff. It's kind of different. We don't usually do that here in Alabama. We don't usually do that. We saw the foundations of Jerusalem, how it's built on bedrock. We saw all the activity going over the gates, people coming in and out in cars, street vendors. Really cool. All the activity of Jerusalem. You feel kind of like a little bit dirty, kind of looking down on stuff. They don't know you're up there looking down on them. It's really, really neat to see all that. And Jerusalem is like a whole city on top of the city. There's a soccer field up there. Some little kids came up to us when we were walking along who were playing soccer and started not talking to us because they were speaking Arabic. There's satellite dishes up there. I mean, it's just really interesting when you go on this Ramparts Walk. So, this is the modern-day city of Jerusalem that we talked about today. This is the Temple Mount that we'll talk about tonight. This is the city of David. The government of Jerusalem is somewhere, I tried to find this and I could not find it, but somewhere up in here is the government of Jerusalem. The Knesset, by the way, if you get a cab in Jerusalem, you say, I want to go to the Knesset, because our K's are silent, right? Huh? You want to go where? He said, the Knesset? I said, yes, the Knesset, that's where we're going to go. But the Knesset's up here, that's their legislative body. The Yad Vashem Museum is up here, the Museum of the Holocaust. So a lot of stuff outside the city proper walls of Jerusalem that you can go see in Jerusalem today. So, that was fast. I talked too fast. We spent the last several minutes building the city of Jerusalem from its original mountains and valleys up to the city of the modern age. I think it's important for us to understand about Jerusalem because there's so much of it in the Bible. It takes more proof, as I mentioned, to be an atheist than does a Christian because Jerusalem is one giant proof. Over and over and over and over again, you see things that are talked about in the Bible that are physically there in Jerusalem. We'll talk about some of that tonight, specifically when we talk about the fall of Jerusalem. So tonight, we will do the same for the Temple Mount. We will look at all the structures on the temple. We'll look at the fortress on the Temple Mount. There were 3 Temple Mounts. There were 3 temples. They didn't happen at the same times. So that makes it a little challenging historically to keep up with, but we'll talk about all that tonight. And then we'll tear everything down. We will look how the incompetence of one man precipitated its destruction in AD 70, actually AD 66. And we'll talk about how the Zealots precipitated its destruction. Jerusalem pretty much fell before Rome ever got there because of the Zealots. You had a faction of Zealots controlled by a man named Simon, another controlled by Eleazar, another controlled by John of Giscala. And these Zealots factions were fighting each other, and they had one common goal besides fighting each other. They were there to destroy Jerusalem from within. And if anyone wanted to escape during the Roman fall, the Roman destruction of Jerusalem, the Zealots were there to keep them in. And as they were starving to death, the Zealots would go and steal their food. If the person begged, he said, please just kill me. I can't take it anymore. I'm starving to death. Just kill me. They wouldn't kill him. If the person said, don't kill me. Please don't kill me. You can have my food. They would kill him. The Zealots were very, very bad people. And they really, truly precipitated the fall of Jerusalem, unfortunately. And again, I could do a whole lesson just on the Zealots and their contribution to the fall of Jerusalem. But we'll gloss over it pretty quick tonight. Again, the displays, the website, and books out back. It's a good thing we have a little bit of extra time. I encourage you to please go in the back and look at the displays that are there if you've not done that yet. The coins, the Bible pages, the temple model, those kind of things. Lots of posters, lots more information.
So as I studied the Intertestament period, I learned more and more about it, obviously. And I even went back to the beginning of time, back to the beginning of Jewish time. And I have this road map that I bring to a lot of my shows. You can see the road map stretches off into the distance. I think this canvas is 12 feet long or something like that. But it's something that I carry with me everywhere I go because it reminds me of the history that I'm talking about and the roots of Intertestament history being from Old Testament history and then following on to New Testament history. And speaking of history, I'm very interested in history. This is a chart of the different kings, prefects, procurators over the different regions, Judea, Samaria, Idumea, all the way through Chalcis. And we saw that Herod the Great ruled over all these kingdoms for many, many years, over all 7 of the 8 regions. And then it was broken up among 3 of his sons, Herod Archelaus, Herod Antipas, and Philip the Tetrarch. And then after Herod Archelaus was banished in AD 6, the prefects took over Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, which became the region of Judea, or Iudea, in AD 6. Then after the prefects came Herod Agrippa, and then after he passed away, the procurators took over. And then, of course, we have the Jewish war at that point. But history is very interesting to me. Next up, the history of Alexander the Great. You can't see much on this chart. There's a poster that I bring to my shows also, but it has all the details of everything that Alexander the Great conquered, starting in Macedon, over on the very left part, the most western part of the chart, and then the Greeks, and then he just pushed westward. And he was an amazing, amazing general as he pushed out, and he just totally crushed the Persian Empire. So this chart is something that you can get a lot out of. There's a lot of detail in this chart, and again, it's something that I bring to my talks. Next up, something very interesting to me is numismatic history. I have several different coin collections in my personal collections. This particular one, are all the prutas that we know of that exist for all of the rulers of Cold Syria. Cold Syria being another name for Israel, being another name for Palestine, Levant. But Cold Syria is what it was called back in the times of the Intertestament period. Starting with John Hyrcanus I, one of the Hasmomean rulers, and this has all the way through all the prefects, procurators that had coins, all the way up to the Jewish revolt in the late 60s AD. And then the last coin in this collection is a Judea capta coin. Vespasian, the emperor's actually denarius, is the only silver coin in this collection. But this Vespasian coin represents the end of the independence of Israel. All right, so these are all the Roman emperors of the New Testament. Now, many people believe that Julius Caesar was the first Roman emperor. He was not. Although he did kind of set the stage for what Roman emperors would become. But the first Roman emperor was named Octavian, or later became Augustus, the revered. He became emperor in 27 BC. When he became emperor, of course, what followed were several emperors after him, Tiberius, Caligula, etc. So this is a coin collection of the silver denarii. All these are silver coins. Silver denarii of all the Roman emperors of the New Testament, all the way through Trajan. The Emperor Trajan ruled toward the end of the New Testament, but really toward the end of the lives of the people of the New Testament. John, on the Isle of Patmos, was one of the last people to have lived that we know about in the New Testament. And Trajan ruled during his time. So that's one of the coin collections that I show at some of my talks. Next up is a Tyrian shekel. These coins are extremely rare. This coin doesn't exist anymore very, very much because they were all destroyed by the Romans. When the Romans sacked Jerusalem in AD 70, they took all the treasures of the temple. And when they took this treasure, the treasure were Tyrian shekels. And the reason that is Tyrian shekels were used by Jews to pay the tax, the required annual tax for Jewish males of adult age. So Tyrian shekel, a half shekel tax was the required tax. So they had half shekels, this is a full shekel, and this is a half shekel. So these were all in the temple when Rome came in and looted, and they basically turned all these shekels, these Tyrian shekels, into denarii, Roman denarii. They used them to pay their troops. They used them to build the Colosseum. They used them for various different reasons that Rome had. But again, these Tyrian shekels are very rare, but they were very common in Israel in the day. Next up is a model of Herod's temple. I'd like to thank Scott Schneider for putting this model together. He actually puts together all the pieces of the kit, and then you take them and you glue them all together. But the kit was really an amazing piece of work that he's done. But this is something that I put together from his kit, and I put it on a little bit of a different base. I actually have actual tile in the temple courts, in the outer court, in the women's court, and also the priest court in the back where the actual temple proper is. And I also added on an outer wall called the soreg. This soreg is something where only Jews were allowed to walk into. Gentiles were forced to be outside the soreg, only Jews allowed inside. And if any Gentile ventured inside the soreg, they would be put to death. Next up is a big chunk of salt from the Dead Sea. We bought this when we were over there in a gift shop, but it is actually from the Dead Sea, so it's kind of cool. When you study history, you have to study geography. There's really no other way around it. This is a map that I bought while I was over there also in Israel. This was hard to get back on the plane because it's actually a topographic relief map. There's actually bumps and dips in this map showing the hills and valleys and the Dead Sea. It's really low and whatever. But anyway, you do have to study geography when you study history. This is a map I obtained. This map is from the early 1900s of Palestine. And we talk about Palestine in one of my classes. The third class that I have on YouTube talks about the name Palestine, where that came from. And this is a map of Palestine from the early 1900s. Next up is an oil map. It's amazing what you can get online. I ordered this online. It is supposedly authentic, a 1st century AD, I believe, oil lamp. But it shows how you'd put oil in there in a wick, and that's what they would use for their main source of light. This is a picture of an Apocrypha that I have. Now, 3 classes of literature. You think of canonical books, you think of things that are scripture, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, etc. Those are scripture. Those are canonical. Apocryphal books are those books that some people believe are canonical, but others don't. For example, Protestants do not believe the Apocrypha are canonical. Catholics do. Of the 18 Old Testament apocryphal books, 12 are believed to be canonical by the Catholics. Most people don't know this, but the King James Version contained the Apocrypha when it was first printed in 1611. This particular copy that I have here is a 1614 version of the King James Version Apocrypha. I also have several different pages. This is inside that 1614 version of the Apocrypha, showing the prayer of Manasseh and also the first book of the Maccabees. I have several other pages, ancient pages from Bible texts. This page is the Geneva Bible from 1578. It's from Psalms. This page is the 1576 version of Geneva Bible. And again, some of these are hard to see because they're in frames and a little bit of glare on the glass. This is a page from the Great Bible. This is a page from the 1611 version of the King James Bible. I was excited. This is the first page that I got of the Apocrypha, and I just ordered a page. I bought the cheapest page, and the guy ended up sending me a title page of the first book of Maccabees, and I thought that was very exciting. So I got a title page for a cheaper price, and this kind of started me down my journey of collecting ancient Bible pages. Next up is word clouds. I thought it'd be interesting to look at the words in the Old Testament, the words in the New Testament, and the words in a stand-in for the Intertestament, which I used a stand-in. I used my book. In the Old Testament, we have words that are about the nation of Israel. So when you look at a word cloud, the bigger the word means the more occurrences that word is in that text. So shall is a big word. So it was the Old Testament was a book of doing. You know, you shall do this, and the Old Testament really was a relationship between God, the Lord, and the nation of Israel. In the New Testament, we see a little bit of a shift. We still see God and man, but we also Jesus. So we see a relationship between man and Jesus in the New Testament. In the Intertestament, I use my book as a stand-in for that, and what we see is Roman. Of course, that makes sense. Roman is an adjective. We have Roman emperors, Roman territories, Roman military, all these things, Roman. That's why Roman stands out as the biggest word in the Intertestament. We see a big word also as Herod, the Jews, Antiochus, the temple. So there's a lot that happened in the Intertestament, in the Intertestament history, that really does tie together the end of the Old Testament to the beginning of the New Testament.
Thank y'all for being here. And wow, I've never finished anything early before in my life. So y'all have a good day.